Wyoming Territory, March 1882. Snow still clung to the edges of the foothills like it had nowhere else to go. Zeke O'Doyle saw her before she saw him, thin as fence wire, stumbling down the wagon trail with her hands tucked under her arms, dragging one boot behind her like it hated her. The wind caught her dark skirt and snapped it around her legs, and he figured if she had been any smaller, it would have carried her clear off the ridge. He slid down from his horse. "Miss," he called, keeping his voice steady, calm. "You all right?" She lifted her head. Her face was gaunt, lips cracked, eyes dark and flat like she had not slept in a week. Her coat was too big and torn at the seams. Her left boot was missing a sole completely. Zeke stepped forward, slow and careful. "You hurt?" She blinked. "I know, just cold." Her voice was barely there. "My name's Prue Bennett." "Zeke O'Doyle," he said, offering his hand, but she did not take it. Her fingers were tucked tight under her arms, blue at the knuckles. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She nodded just once. Then her knees buckled. Zeke caught her before she hit the ground. She was light in his arms, too light. Her ribs pressed through her worn dress like fence posts. He did not ask anything else. Just got her on his horse, climbed up behind her, and turned toward his ranch in the low valley 2 miles west. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was dipping behind the pines. Zeke carried her inside, laid her on the cot beside the stove, and stoked the fire higher. She was shivering so hard her teeth clicked. He brought a blanket, then another, then filled a pot with beans and salt pork and set it to cook. She watched him, silent, eyes heavy. He crouched beside her. "You got people, Prue?" She hesitated, then shook her head once. He said nothing more. He brought her a tin plate of food an hour later, and she ate like she was afraid it might disappear. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Zeke nodded. "Got a spare room down the hall. You can sleep there once you're steady on your feet. Stove'll keep the whole cabin warm tonight." She looked down at her boots, or what was left of them. "I walked from Casper." "That is over 50 miles, he said. "Why?" Prue's hands tightened in her lap. "I had to." He could see she did not want to say more, so he did not push. The next morning, he rode into town before dawn. He came back with 2 pairs of boots, one practical, one softer inside for when her feet healed. He left them by her door, along with a clean dress from the general store and a small tin of salve. When she came out later, her hair was combed and her face washed clean. She wore the new dress, and her eyes looked less hollow. She did not say anything about the boots, but he caught her glancing at them like she did not understand why they were hers. They spent the day quiet. Zeke fixed the barn roof. Prue folded laundry she found drying by the stove. She moved slow but steadier. That night over supper she finally spoke again. "I had a husband," she said. "He died 2 winters ago. I worked on a farm after that. The man there, he was not kind. So I left." Zeke nodded once. "You are safe here." "I know," she said softly. By the 3rd day she was walking easier. Her cheeks had color again. She helped him tend the chickens, feed the mule. She did not ask for anything, she just did what she could. Zeke watched her from the porch one evening. She was hanging laundry, arms stretched to the sky, face tilted into the wind like she could breathe it in and make it hers. He felt something shift in his chest then. Not sudden, just sure, but he did not kiss her. He made sure she had warm food and boots that fit and a bed that was hers alone. A week passed. Then another. One morning she brought him coffee on the porch. "You do not talk much," she said, handing him the mug. "Never had much to say," he replied. She smiled a little. "I used to talk too much. My mother said I filled the whole house with noise." "She gone too?" Prue nodded. "Typhoid. I was 16. He looked at her hands, small and strong now. "You still talk, just softer." She sat beside him, the blanket around her shoulders. "You never asked me to leave. You never gave me a reason to." She looked out over the hills, quiet. Then, I thought I was done being seen. Zeke turned to her. You were never invisible, Prue. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She just reached for his hand and held it tight. Spring came slow and muddy. The snow melted in patches. Wildflowers crept up the hillside. Zeke taught her how to split kindling. She showed him how to mend a tear so neat it vanished. One afternoon, she came into the barn while he was brushing the mule. She leaned against the post. I have been thinking, she said. I do not want to go anywhere else. He looked up from the brush. I mean, she said quickly, I would understand if you wanted me to, but this place feels like something I could keep. Zeke crossed the space between them. He took off his gloves. You do not have to go, he said. You never did. She nodded, eyes shining. Then finally he reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. And this time he kissed her, not rushed. Not timid either, just honest. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I think I might be a little in love with you. Zeke smiled. Good, because I am already there. She wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in a long time, Prue Bennett did not feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was home. The creek behind the cabin ran high from the thaw, and the cottonwoods along its banks shed yellow husks of bark as the wind picked through their branches. Zeke was hauling fence posts from the lower pasture when he saw Prue kneeling in the garden bed beside the shed. Her sleeves rolled up to the elbows, fingers sunk deep in the soft earth. He leaned the posts against the gate and walked over. You planning to grow something there? She looked up, brushing her hand across her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt above one brow. I was thinking potatoes, maybe some carrots if the ground's not too rocky. You'll want to turn that soil before the end of the week. Gets crusted over when the sun starts to hold. I figured, she said, and sat back on her heels. This land's dry, but it listens. You just have to know how to ask. Zeke crouched beside her. You done much planting before? Some. The farm I was on last year had a small patch behind the smokehouse. I watched how the old woman there did it. Quiet hands, slow season. She said seeds don't like to be rushed. He nodded. Sounds like she knew what she was doing. She did, Prue said, then added, she died of fever halfway through the harvest. They didn't speak for a while. The wind stirred the grass, and a magpie flicked down to the fence post watching them. Then she asked, You ever think about bringing cattle in again? Zeke rubbed the back of his neck. I ran a small herd after my brother passed, sold most off after the second winter. Got tired of burying more calves than I kept. Prue pressed her palm flat to the ground. You think it'd be different now? He looked at her, seeing the steadiness in her posture, the quiet intention in the way she tested the dirt. Maybe, she met his eyes. I could help. Zeke didn't answer right away. He stood, offered her a hand. She took it and he pulled her up gently. If we're doing that, he said, we'll need to fence the far side of the creek. Coyotes push in from the ridge. Prue nodded. I'll patch what I can. Just show me where your wire's stored. Later that afternoon, Zeke found her in the hayloft sorting through nails and rusted hinges, sleeves still rolled, humming something under her breath that didn't have a tune so much as a rhythm. He leaned against the post and listened. She didn't stop, just kept counting nails into a wooden box, slow and methodical. After a while, she spoke without turning. What was your brother like? Zeke stepped inside. Quieter than me, could draw anything he saw. Used to carve horses out of scrap wood, leave them on the porch when he knew I was too tired to talk. I would have liked him. I think he'd have liked you too. She looked over her shoulder then. You think you'll stay here your whole life? Zeke considered that. Never thought much past the next year, but I don't aim to leave unless I have to. Prue nodded, then went back to sorting. When evening came, they sat on the porch. The sun had slipped low, painting the hills the color of old pennies. She brought out a pot of boiled turnips and dried venison she'd stretched with onion skin and bone broth. Zeke tasted it, then looked at her with a new kind of respect. "You cook like someone who's learned how to make do," he said. "I do most things that way," she replied, folding her hands in her lap. Zeke reached over, resting his hand lightly atop hers. "Doesn't mean you always have to." She didn't pull away. "I want to try something, if that's all right," he said. She looked at him, eyes steady. This time she kissed him. It wasn't shy, it wasn't rushed. It was a choice made with both feet planted squarely on the ground. When she pulled back, she didn't look away. "I want to build something here," she said. Zeke nodded. "Then we'll build it together." The wind had settled. Far off, an owl called once, then again. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and for the first time in a long while there was no hurry in either of them. By mid-April, the ground had softened enough for fence posts to hold firm. The two of them worked side by side, sweat soaking through their shirts by noon and dust clinging to their knees. They didn't rush the work. Zeke set the rhythm, and Prue matched it without needing to be told how. In the evenings, they washed up with cold water from the creek and dried their hands on the same rough towel. Supper was quieter now, not out of distance but comfort. They didn't need to fill the silence, each knew where the other's thoughts were most of the time. One morning, Prue lingered inside as Zeke hitched the wagon. When she stepped out, he noticed her holding a folded quilt. "I want to take this to the last ridge," she said. "That hill with the white rock near the spruce line." Zeke nodded, taking the reins in hand. "You want me to ride up with you, if you don't mind." They didn't speak on the ride. The wind had a bite to it, but the sun was steady. When they reached the ridge, Prue climbed down first, carrying the quilt under one arm. She walked a short ways from the trail, then knelt and spread the fabric over a smooth patch of grass. Zeke stayed back, giving her space. After a while, she called to him. "I used to lay like this with my mother after chores," she said, lying back on the quilt, her hair fanned across the stitched stars. "Before the sickness took her, we'd listen to birds and try to name clouds." Zeke sat beside her, one knee pulled up. "You want company or you want to remember alone? I want you here," she said simply. He lay back beside her, boots crossed at the ankle, eyes on the wide stretch of sky. "You ever think about having a family?" she asked after a while. He turned his head toward her. "Sometimes. Thought it'd happen different than this, but I ain't sorry." "I'm not either," she said. "I used to think love had to come loud, all full of promises and fire, but this—" She reached for his hand. "This feels like a thing that holds." Zeke threaded his fingers through hers. "We could make it last." They stayed there most of the afternoon. When the sun began to dip, they packed the quilt and rode back with the wind at their backs. That night, she took her mending to the porch while he sharpened one of the plow blades. The lantern between them flickered as moths danced close and veered off again. Prue didn't look up when she said, "I haven't spoken vows since I was 19. They didn't hold. I don't want to do it that way again." Zeke set the blade down, rubbing his palm across his thigh. "How would you want it?" "I want to stand in the dirt behind the barn, with the hens pecking nearby and you holding my hands. I want to say what's true, not what's written." He nodded. "We could do that tomorrow." She looked over, eyes searching his. "You sure?" "I've been sure since you asked me to stay beside you on that quilt." She smiled then, small and certain. The next afternoon they stood barefoot in the garden row she'd cleared for potatoes. No one else was there. No paper, no preacher. Just the wind, the soil, and their hands clasped tight. Zeke said, "I'll carry what's hard and I'll share what's good. If you stay, I'll stay." Prue said, "I'll plant with you and mend with you and sleep beside you every night I'm alive. I'll love you plain and long." They kissed once and then again, and the hens clucked behind them like witnesses. That night they climbed into the same bed, no space between them, no questions left, just warmth. And outside, the wind settled down for once, like it knew it didn't need to test them anymore. The first calf came before dawn, slick and trembling in the cold spring air. Prue found it curled against its mother in the eastern pasture, still steaming in the morning light. She knelt beside it, her skirts damp with dew, and touched the calf's flank gently. It blinked at her, uncertain but breathing strong. By the time Zeke reached her, she'd already checked the mother's legs and cleared the afterbirth from the grass. She did good, Prue said, brushing her fingers clean against her apron. Didn't need help. Zeke crouched beside her. You see the way it stands, strong on all fours. Won't need splints, he nodded. We'll call him March. They walked back up the slope in silence, the grass heavy underfoot. When they reached the barn, Zeke handed her a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She opened it on the porch, a set of leather gloves smaller than his with the stitching neat and tight. I noticed yours don't fit right, he said. Her fingers slid into the new pair. Where did you get these made? Had them done by Miss Cranley's boy in town. Told him they were for someone who doesn't mind work, but likes to feel what she's holding. She flexed her hands, then leaned into his shoulder, not speaking for a long time. That afternoon, they took the wagon south to check the irrigation ditch that cut through the rocky slope near the edge of their property. The water had carved a shallower path during the last thaw, weakening the channel. Prue climbed down first, boots sinking into the soft bank. Zeke passed her a spade. We'll need to shore up the west side, otherwise it'll flood the lower fence. I can drag brush from the ridge. There's fir branches thick enough to wedge here. He nodded, and they worked without needing to spell the plan out further. As dusk settled, they sat on the bank, hands muddy, arms tired. Prue pulled a flask from her coat pocket. There's elderberry tonic inside, she said. From the woman I stayed with last winter. She taught me how to make it. Zeke took a sip and handed it back. Tastes like the end of a hard day. She smiled. She used to say it kept the lungs clear and the bones honest. He looked out across the land, the hills layered in blue shadow. You ever think about building more here, not just fences and pens? Prue turned to him. What do you mean? Maybe a schoolhouse, or a smokehouse big enough to trade from, something more than just us. She considered that, rubbing her thumb across the flask's worn metal. There's a girl in town named Ruth. She's got a baby and no husband. Lives with her father behind the livery, Zeke nodded. I've seen her. Quiet. She can sew, and she reads better than most men I know. You think she'd come out here? Prue looked at him. If I asked, I think she might. They rode back under a sky full of stars and no moon. The mule plodded steady, and Prue leaned lightly against Zeke's arm. Neither of them spoke, but the quiet between them had weight now, like earth packed solid after rain. The next morning, Prue rose early and washed her hair in the creek, teeth chattering as the snowmelt ran past her ankles. Zeke found her hanging linens on the line, her braids still wet at the ends. I've been thinking, she said without turning. I want to plant a plum tree by the porch for the years ahead. He stepped beside her, holding a basket of eggs. Then we'll dig the hole today. She met his eyes. I want it to be ours, not just mine. Zeke set the basket down, took her face in both hands. Everything that grows here belongs to both of us now. She kissed him then, slower than before, with her hands pressed lightly to his chest. And when they pulled apart, the world felt balanced in a new way. The kind of weight that doesn't burden, only roots. By June, the plum tree had taken root just off the porch, its leaves a soft green that fluttered in the breeze like small flags of promise. The soil there had taken some coaxing. Zeke dug twice before the roots held right, but now it stood straight, watered each morning by Prue with the same tin pail she used for the chickens. The garden rows behind the barn had begun to show their first shoots. Potatoes, just as she'd hoped, and a line of thick-leafed squash she hadn't planned on. The seeds must have mixed in with what she'd brought from town. She didn't mind. It felt like the land was choosing its own way of giving back. Prue stood at the fence one morning, watching the hills. Her hair was pinned up sharp, and she wore a deep blue skirt Zeke hadn't seen before, probably the one she'd tucked away at the bottom of her trunk, saved for something that felt like a future. "You hear from Ruth?" Zeke asked, walking up beside her. Prue nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "She's coming next week. Her father passed and she's got no one left in town. I told her we'd make space." "How's the boy?" "Coughs better. She's worried about him traveling, but I said we'd ride out and meet her halfway." Zeke leaned against the rail. "We've got that spare cot. Mule shed's cleared out too if she needs time. She said she'll help with the mending, maybe keep a few hens. I think she just wants quiet. She'll get it here." Prue looked over at him. "You ever think about what kind of father you'd be?" Zeke took a breath, thoughtful. "I think I'd be good at the quiet parts. The steady ones. Might fumble the rest, but I'd show up." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers between his. "That's more than most ever had." That evening they sat at the small table inside, a warm skillet between them full of cornmeal cakes and stewed greens. Prue poured water from the kettle, her movements easy. The cabin smelled faintly of rosemary and wood smoke. "I've been thinking about teaching again," she said, breaking a piece of cornbread in half. "Not like a schoolhouse, just the basics. Reading, sums. If Ruth wants to learn, maybe others would too." Zeke set down his knife. "You'd be good at that." "I wasn't when I started. Too sharp-tongued." "But I've changed." "You've grown," he said. "That's different." She looked at him then, a softness in her expression that went deeper than affection. "I want to make something here, Zeke, not just survive it, something that lasts after us." He reached across the table, cupping her hand in his. "Then we'll build it together." That summer drifted in slow, like smoke curling from a chimney. Ruth arrived with her boy bundled close, wide-eyed and quiet. They made space without question. Prue set up a cot in the back room, showed Ruth how to boil the milkweed for coughs, and taught her which herbs could be dried and stored. Zeke built a second chicken coop. Ruth's boy followed him everywhere, mimicking his steps with a stick he called his measure stick. Though he never explained what it measured, in late August, Prue found herself waking earlier, resting longer at midday. When Zeke asked, she brushed it off. At first, too much sun, not enough sleep. But by the second week of September, she laid his hand across her belly as they stood by the creek, and he understood. "How far?" he asked, voice low. "Not far yet," she said, but sure enough to say it aloud. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing his cheek to her hair. "We'll be ready." They spent the fall preparing. Zeke built a cradle from pine, carving a small plum blossom into the headboard. Prue sewed blankets from old dresses, piecing together fabric that had made her who she was. By November, the first frost dusted the hills. Prue moved slower now, careful with her steps. Ruth took over the heavier tasks, and the boy, now walking with confidence, carried firewood in small armfuls, proud of his work. One morning, Prue stood at the kitchen window, watching the wind lift the edge of the porch curtain. "I never thought I'd have this," she said without turning. Zeke came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's yours now," he said. "Ours." The baby came in the early hours of a cold December morning. Ruth kept the fire high, and Zeke never left the room except when asked. Prue labored steady, quiet but unyielding. When the child arrived, a girl, small and strong, lunged. Prue held her close, eyes closed, breath catching in her throat more from awe than exhaustion. Zeke knelt beside the bed, brushing hair from her damp brow. "She's got your mouth," he said. "She's got your hands," Prue whispered. "Strong." They named her Eliza after no one, just a name that felt like it had always belonged to them. That winter passed slow but not harsh. The cabin stayed warm. Ruth stayed on, teaching the boy his letters and learning her own alongside him. Zeke fixed the roof over the back room and built a small desk for Prue beside the hearth, where she started writing letters, some to neighbors, others to no one in particular. Just words she wanted to say. By spring, the plum tree bloomed. Prue stood beneath it, Eliza in her arms, the blossoms falling around them in pale, fragrant drifts. Zeke walked up behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "She's watching the petals," he said. "They're the first thing she's really seen." "And you?" he asked. Prue looked up at him. "I see everything now, and I want all of it. With you." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then her lips. They stood there, beneath the tree they'd planted with their own hands, the land blooming around them, the sky wide and open. There were fences to mend, fields to tend, and days to meet one by one. But for the first time in either of their lives, they weren't waiting for anything else to begin. They had already arrived.